What's up, designers? Today we're going to be talking about different types of rollers. Rollers are really important on our robots because that's what we use a lot of times for intakes. The specific rollers I'm going to be talking about for this is the polycarb rollers. So these are not very compliant, unlike those squishy compliant wheels, which means that these force the game piece to comply or squish, as opposed to absorbing that in themselves. These rollers are just polycarb, but most of the time you'll see them, we cover them in like silicon. So this is the standard configuration we have, where it's called a live axle. So we can see the motor here is pulling a pulley. This pulley is mounted to the shaft with a hex bore, and because of this, when the pulley rotates, the shaft rotates, and the polycarb roller is attached to the shaft via this little end plug. So this is nice. This is what we generally do if we want to have like squishy wheels or a different type of wheel on the shaft. This is generally what we go with. However, there are a few drawbacks. First of all, a lot of the times the bearings can fall out. You see they're only attached by this thing here called a flange on one side. So that means that it can't fall in towards the inside in this configuration. However, it could pop out theoretically. And we've fixed this in the past in various ways. Sometimes we just add rivets to the end so that they can't come out. Or we have a 3D printed little cap that goes on top of it so it can't come out. But then ultimately that just takes up a lot of space. It's also difficult if we need to swap out the shaft, because what we need to do is we need to unbolt one side and then slide everything off of it to get the shaft out. So that can be kind of a pain. So yeah, that pretty much leads us to the solution to this, which is going to be to use a Deadaxle roller when we can. So here, this may look pretty similar. We've still got our motor, our pulley, and our roller. However, this time the pulley is attached to the roller using this custom 3D printed plug. So see, it just inserts into the roller and we can like glue and bolt it in. Then at the top of the pulley is a bearing, as we can see here. Yeah. So the bearing, as opposed to being on the plates, it's on the shaft, and then on the other end, it's the perfect size that it just fits a bearing. So this means that when the motor spins, this pulley spins like normal. However, see how the shaft over here, it's not rotating? The roller is rotating and the pulley is rotating, but the shaft isn't. Now this is good for a few reasons. You can ignore this. First of all, it's a lot more stiff. So as opposed to the live axle, you don't really have anything supporting this. Maybe you might have a churro going across realistically or something like that, but the plates can still shift in whatever gaps there are. And this is also part of the reason why the bearings pop out sometimes, is because it's not as firm. So for this, you've got the shaft. Let me see if I can isolate the shaft. Notice how the shaft is just going in between the two plates. So this is acting like its own structure. So it's holding the plates together, and it's like creating tension, right? So the plates can't go in or out really because they're attached to this shaft. So that's a benefit that we don't normally have with bearings. It's also a lot lower profile, whereas with the live axle configuration, you need a huge hole to fit the bearing. For the Deadaxle, it's just a bolt hole to bolt into the shaft. There are, like, the major downside is that it pretty heavily relies on 3D printed pulleys, unless we want to like somehow make some weird configuration with metal pulleys. That's kind of complicated. So the easiest way is to just 3D print them. However, that does mean that sometimes if they're not printed right, eventually they'll wear down, and then the belts won't have as much of a grip on the teeth, and eventually it just might stop working altogether. However, it also, I mentioned this earlier, this is a benefit the bearings aren't gonna pop out. So see here, like realistically we'd have a spacer here, but even if we didn't, probably there's no way the bearing could come out, because there's just not enough room. So this means, like in our intakes in the past, we've had a lot of issues of bearings coming out, and that messes up the whole shaft. But with a dead axle, that's not going to happen. Just to clarify, this is called a dead axle because the axle, or the shaft here, it's not actually moving. It doesn't require the axle to move for the system to move, whereas the live axle does. So you'll also see a lot of dead axles with probably usually stronger axles to pivot arms and such, because you're not relying on the grip of whatever pattern the axle has, in this case a hex pattern. Okay, so now you may be wondering how to do this. This part looks kind of complicated. So how do we make this? Well, fortunately, you don't have to make it. Recently, I've been working on an Evergreen document in our classroom. So you can go to whatever assembly you're working in, or the part studio, and go to Insert, Other Documents, and then Evergreen. I'm already in it, so let's just say from my home. You go to the classroom, this Evergreen folder. We're going to be working on different documents here. Evergreen just refers to things that we will use in multiple seasons. So it doesn't matter what season this is, we can still probably use these. Right now in this document, so far I've made two things, one for a gear and one for a pulley. So the gear, it's configurable. You can do end plug or center gear. So this means that if you want, let me generate what a center gear would look like. What I showed you in the Deadaxle assembly right here, that's an end plug, because it goes on the end of the pulley. Whereas this, see, this could go in between, or sorry, it goes on the end of the roller. Whereas this, it could go in between two rollers. This isn't going to be really useful for gears. This might be more useful for pulleys in intake systems that have sort of a long run of different rollers. The other features of the gear, the width, that just dictates how wide the teeth are. The DP, or diametric pitch, this is going to be important. The standard DP for metal gears that we use is 20. However, because printed gears can be weaker and the teeth can fall out, sometimes we want to do a slightly lower DP. So you notice if I do like 15 or something and generate that and insert it and give it time to load, it's the same amount of teeth, but each tooth is a lot bigger. So that's good because they have a lot more like grip on each other. The tooth count, that's pretty simple. It just changes how many teeth. This is a tooth. It changes how many of these there are. Generally, the more teeth you have, the bigger the gear. And then finally, this checkbox here is helical. I need to change this so it doesn't default to being on. But helical is what gives it its V-looking pattern, like this chevron sort of thing. It's good because it cancels the directions of the gears and prevents it from slipping. So if you have two helical gears going against each other, they're not going to be able to slip away from each other laterally that easy, because each side is sort of focusing it towards the middle. That's a simple description of that. Now if we look at the pulleys, it's similar but slightly different. We still can choose end plug or center pulley. Again, center pulley might be a little bit more useful for pulleys than it is for gears, but I think we'll still primarily be using the end plugs. The pulley width, there are two standard pulley widths, which is why you only have two options here, 15 millimeters and 9 millimeters. Tooth count is a lot like the gear count. The gear tooth count, it just shows how many teeth, how many little knobs, I guess, are on the gear. Generally what we try to use as a team is 18, because it's a good amount of teeth for a relatively low diameter, which is good because if we had huge pulleys, then they would take up a lot of space. And then finally, the flange diameter, that just, here, if I go back here, that's just how wide this flange is. So if you have something where you're worried that the belt might slip off, you might want a slightly larger flange, just so that it holds it in place. One thing to keep in mind, sometimes if you have a pulley whose like tooth size is larger than the flange size, then it will throw an error when you try to do that. So make sure that your flange size is greater than the pitch diameter of the pulley, which you don't have to know, just if it doesn't work, put in a bigger flange, effectively. Yeah, this is sort of a lot of information, and I hope that we can sort of redo the way we design with these polycarb rollers to incorporate dead axles, because of the benefits I discussed earlier. But if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you have any suggestions for maybe other configurations that you'd want, I can definitely do that. So yeah, thank you.